Captain Lina Cade stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the viewport where PX-917 loomed, a dark, rocky world orbiting a weak, flickering star. It wasn't the most promising destination, but it was her duty to chart the unknown, to push forward no matter the odds. The bridge was quiet, save for the low hum of the ship's AI, Erebus, monitoring every system aboard. Approaching PX-917, Captain, said Lieutenant Marco Devereaux, the ship's science officer, breaking the silence. Prepare a high-resolution scan of the surface, Lina ordered. Her voice was calm but firm, the tone of a leader who had faced the unknown before. Marco nodded, his fingers gliding across the console. Scanning now. No signs of vegetation or water. Atmosphere is thin, mostly carbon dioxide. Geologically active, though. And, he paused, frowning. What is it? Lina asked, her attention snapping to him. There's an energy signature, Marco said. It's faint, but structured. Lina felt a chill creep up her spine. Structured? Could it be artificial? Marco hesitated. It's possible. It's unlike anything I've seen before. Erebus, Lina called, addressing the ship's AI. Can you confirm the nature of this energy signature? The AI responded in its smooth, emotionless tone. Analyzing. The energy signature does not match any known natural phenomena. It exhibits patterns consistent with artificial design. The implications were staggering. Humanity had searched for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence for centuries, yet nothing conclusive had ever been found. If this signal was indeed artificial, it could change everything. Set a course for the source of the signal, Lina commanded. As the Erebus descended into orbit, the crew prepared for an away mission to the planet's surface. The team included Marco, Chief Engineer Clara Ortiz, and 2 security officers, Jonas and Patel. Lina watched them board the shuttle, her gut twisting with unease. Be careful down there, she said, her voice softer than usual. Clara gave her a reassuring smile. We'll be fine, Captain. Just another day in the field. The shuttle detached and began its descent, disappearing into the planet's thick clouds. The surface of PX-917 was a barren wasteland, its rocky terrain stretching endlessly under a dim, orange sky. The team followed Marco's scanner, navigating the harsh landscape toward the source of the energy signature. It led them to a cave system near the planet's southern pole. This is it, Marco said, stopping at the cave's entrance. His scanner beeped rapidly, the signal stronger here. The group entered cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was cold and dry, and the walls were lined with strange, bioluminescent minerals that glowed faintly, casting an eerie green light. It's beautiful, Clara whispered, running her hand along the wall. Marco frowned at his scanner. The energy signature is coming from deeper inside. Stay close. They moved further into the cave, the air growing colder with each step. Finally, they reached a large chamber, and the sight before them took their breath away. At the center of the chamber stood an alien structure, a ship, or what was left of one. Its surface was corroded and covered in an organic growth that pulsed faintly with light, as if it were alive. The energy signature emanated from within. Clara, can you get a closer look? Marco asked. Clara approached cautiously, her scanner beeping frantically. This material, it's not just metallic. It's biological. It's alive. As she reached out to touch it, the growth recoiled, shrinking away from her hand. Suddenly, a low hum filled the chamber. It grew louder, rising in pitch until it became a deafening shriek. The lights on their suits flickered, and Clara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Get back to the shuttle. Marco shouted. But before they could move, the ground shook violently. Darkness enveloped them. When Clara woke up, she was back aboard the shuttle, her head pounding and her memories fragmented. Jonas was unconscious, his breathing shallow, and Patel was gone. Marco sat in the pilot's seat, staring blankly ahead as the shuttle ascended toward the Erebus. "What happened?" Clara asked weakly. Marco didn't respond. The shuttle docked with the Erebus, and the remaining crew rushed to help the injured team. Jonas was taken to the med bay, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. His skin turned pale, and his veins glowed faintly with the same bioluminescent light they had seen in the cave. Within hours, his body dissolved into a cloud of shimmering particles that seeped into the ship's ventilation system. Panic spread among the crew. The malfunctions that had plagued the ship before the mission intensified. Lights flickered, systems failed, and an oppressive presence seemed to fill the Erebus. Crew members reported hearing whispers in the corridors, voices speaking in an alien language. Shadows moved where none should exist, and paranoia gripped everyone. Clara was the first to piece together the horrifying truth. "The entity from the cave, it's aboard the Erebus," she said during an emergency meeting. "It's not just alive, it's intelligent. And it's spreading." Lina paced the bridge, her mind racing as Clara's words settled over the group like a shroud. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She was captain, but no amount of training had prepared her for this. "So what are you saying, Clara?" Marco asked, his voice laced with tension. "That this thing is taking over the ship?" Clara nodded grimly. "Yes. Jonas was just the beginning. Whatever this entity is, it's using us, and the ship, as hosts. The systems it's corrupting, the malfunctions, it's trying to take full control." Marco slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. We're talking about an alien life form with no discernible motives. How can we even fight something we don't understand?" "We don't have the luxury of understanding," Lina said sharply. "We need to contain this, now." Patel, still shaken from his sudden reappearance, spoke up from the corner of the room. "What if we can't contain it? I saw what it did to Jonas. And to me. It's in my head, Captain. I can feel it whispering, watching." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Lina softened her tone, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're not giving up, Patel. Not yet." The crew devised a desperate plan to isolate the infected systems. Clara and Marco worked tirelessly in the engineering bay, rerouting power and severing connections between critical modules. Meanwhile, Patel and Lina took shifts monitoring the remaining crew, looking for signs of the entity's influence. But the entity was relentless. The more they tried to isolate it, the more it fought back. Lights flickered and dimmed across the ship, and strange symbols began appearing on monitors, alien runes that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Crew members reported strange phenomena, objects moving on their own, doors locking and unlocking without command, and whispers that grew louder with each passing hour. Patel's condition worsened. He became withdrawn, speaking less and avoiding eye contact. Lina found him one morning in the observation deck, staring out at the void. "I can't fight it," he whispered, his voice hollow. "You don't have to," Lina said, trying to reassure him. But Patel shook his head. "It's already inside me." Before she could stop him, he opened the airlock. The vacuum of space claimed him in an instant, leaving Lina staring at the empty hatch in stunned silence. The remaining crew dwindled to 6. Fear and tension hung heavy in the air as they realized that the entity wasn't just an external threat, it was inside them, slowly picking them off one by one. Clara proposed a bold solution, an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to disable the entity's bioluminescent particles and potentially destroy it. "It's risky," she admitted. "The pulse could knock out critical systems, including life support. But it might be our only chance." Lina weighed the risks. The Erebus was already a dying ship, its systems failing under the entity's influence. They had no other options. The crew worked together to modify the ship's power core, converting it into a makeshift EMP generator. It was a race against time as the entity's presence grew stronger. By the time they were ready, the ship was barely operational. "Once we trigger the pulse, we'll have to reboot the entire ship manually," Clara explained. "We'll need to coordinate from multiple locations." Lina divided the team into pairs, each assigned to a critical subsystem. She and Clara would handle the main power core, Marco and Ensign Halley the life support systems, and 2 other crew members the navigation array. As they prepared to execute the plan, the entity made its move. The lights went out completely, plunging the Erebus into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to shift and writhe. Lina felt the air grow cold. "Stay focused," she said over the comms, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. They reached their stations and began the sequence. The ship groaned as power was rerouted, and the air filled with a low, resonant hum. The entity reacted violently, surging through the ship's systems. The alien runes on the monitors began to pulse faster, and the bioluminescent glow seeped from the walls like liquid light. "It's fighting us," Marco shouted over the comms. "Hold your ground," Lina barked. Just as they activated the EMP, the entity struck. Clara screamed as the glow enveloped her, her body convulsing. Lina grabbed her, pulling her away from the console, but it was too late. Clara's eyes glowed with the same bioluminescent light, and she whispered in a voice that wasn't her own. "You cannot escape us." The pulse detonated, sending a shockwave through the ship. The lights flared, blindingly bright, and then everything went dark. When Lina woke up, the ship was silent. The oppressive presence was gone, and the bioluminescent glow had vanished. But so had Clara, Marco, and the others. Lina was alone. She wandered the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The Erebus felt like a tomb, its once vibrant halls now cold and lifeless. She reached the bridge and stared out at the void, her reflection staring back at her from the viewport. And then, she saw it. A faint glow, drifting among the stars. It pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. The entity had survived. It was out there, waiting. Lina knew she couldn't return to Earth, not with the risk of spreading the entity further. She sat in the captain's chair, her mind heavy with the weight of her decision. The Erebus would remain in the void, a silent sentinel guarding humanity from the unknown terror it had unleashed. As the glow faded into the distance, Lina whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the dying ship. "Some things should never be found." Lina sat motionless in the captain's chair, staring at the black expanse outside the viewport. The faint glow she had seen, those drifting, alien particles, had disappeared into the void. Her breath came in slow, deliberate pulls as she tried to process the silence around her. The Erebus, once bustling with activity and the vibrant hum of human life, was now an echo chamber. The corridors were lifeless, their stillness broken only by the occasional groan of the ship's metal frame. Eris was silent. For the first time since she had stepped aboard, the AI was completely offline. "Clara?" Lina's voice broke the stillness as she activated her communicator. "Marco?" "Nothing." She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Her hands were shaking. "Pull it together, Captain. You're still breathing. That means you can act." Her first step was to take stock of the situation. She accessed the remaining operational terminal on the bridge, manually rerouting power to it. The screen flickered, a dull blue glow illuminating her face. As she navigated the system, she realized the EMP had worked better than expected. It had wiped out not only the entity's presence but most of the ship's core functions. Life support was running on auxiliary power. Navigation was down. Long-range communication was offline. The realization hit her hard, she was stranded. Lina pushed back from the console and ran a hand through her short-cropped hair. "Okay," she muttered. "Focus." She needed to confirm that she was truly alone. The possibility that some of the crew might still be alive gave her a faint glimmer of hope, but as she moved through the ship's corridors, that hope quickly faded. The med bay was empty, the beds neatly made as if no one had ever occupied them. The engineering bay, where Clara had been working moments before the EMP, was eerily quiet. Clara was gone, along with Marco and the others. The only sign of their presence was the faint scorch marks on the walls, remnants of the entity's bioluminescent particles. By the time Lina reached the crew quarters, she was numb. Each room she entered was the same, empty. It was as if the ship itself had devoured her team. Days passed. Lina maintained a strict routine to keep herself grounded. She rationed her food and water carefully, knowing the supplies would only last so long. She spent hours trying to repair the damaged systems, working tirelessly to restore communication or navigation. But the Erebus had been too severely compromised. She started keeping a log, recording her thoughts and observations in the ship's remaining functional databanks. Day 5, she said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty command center. "I've confirmed I'm the only survivor. The entity is gone, at least, I think it is. The glow, the whispers, the malfunctions, all of it stopped after the EMP. But I can't shake the feeling that it left something behind." Her words hung in the air as she stared at the blank screen. Something changed in the ship. Or maybe in me. By the second week, Lina began to notice strange occurrences. It started small, a flicker in the corner of her vision, a sound like faint footsteps when no one was there. At first, she dismissed them as tricks of her mind, symptoms of isolation. But the phenomena grew more pronounced. One night, as she lay in her bunk trying to sleep, she heard her name whispered, soft, almost tender. "Lina." Her eyes shot open, her heart pounding. She bolted upright, scanning the darkened room. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. There was no response. But as she sat in the stillness, straining to hear, she felt it, a presence. It wasn't like the oppressive weight of the entity before. This was subtler, more intimate. She stood and grabbed a flashlight, moving cautiously toward the door. The corridors outside were dimly lit by emergency lights, casting long, distorted shadows. "Eris," she called, more out of habit than hope. The AI remained silent. As she walked, her flashlight beam caught something strange on the wall ahead. She froze, her pulse quickening. It was a handprint. Faint, glowing, and undeniably human in shape, it pulsed with a soft bioluminescent light. Lina approached it slowly, her mind racing. The handprint looked fresh, as if someone had pressed their palm against the wall only moments ago. "Clara," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Marco?" The silence that followed was deafening. Over the next several days, the handprints began to appear more frequently. They showed up in random places, on the walls, the ceiling, even the viewport on the bridge. Each time Lina discovered one, she felt the same eerie sense of being watched. But it wasn't just the handprints. Objects began to move on their own. Tools she had left in the engineering bay would vanish, only to reappear in her quarters. Her rations, carefully organized, were disturbed as if someone had rifled through them. And the whispers grew louder. At first, they were just faint murmurs, indistinct and distant. But soon, she could make out words spoken in the voices of her lost crew. "Lina," Clara's voice called one night. "Help us," Marco pleaded another time. She tried to ignore them, to focus on her repairs and her routines. But the isolation and the growing strangeness wore her down. Her dreams became vivid and haunting, filled with images of the alien cave and the bioluminescent ship. She saw her crew, their faces pale and glowing, reaching out to her. One night, she woke with a start to find her room bathed in a soft, pulsating light. The glow wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling, it was coming from her own hands. The realization hit her like a blow. The entity wasn't gone. It was inside her. Lina stared at her glowing palms, her breathing shallow. The light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, spreading faintly through her veins like tendrils of fire. She felt a strange sensation, a mix of warmth and cold, like a current flowing through her body. The entity hadn't left the Erebus. It had simply changed tactics. As the days passed, Lina struggled to maintain her grip on reality. The entity's influence grew stronger, its presence more invasive. She could feel it in her thoughts, probing her memories, her fears. It whispered to her, not in alien tongues but in the voices of her crew, weaving a web of guilt and despair. "You left us," Clara's voice accused one night. "You could have saved us," Marco's voice added. "No," Lina whispered, clutching her head. "It wasn't my fault." But the voices didn't stop. By the third week, Lina knew she had to make a decision. The entity was using her, just as it had used Jonas, Patel, and the others. She was its last host, and if she didn't stop it, it would spread beyond the Erebus, reaching Earth or any rescue ship that came for her. She sat in the command center, staring at the manual override for the ship's self-destruct system. Her finger hovered over the button, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. "You can still survive," the entity whispered in her mind. "We can show you wonders. Join us." "No," Lina said aloud, her voice firm. "You don't belong here." With a deep breath, she pressed the button. The ship's alarms blared, and a robotic voice announced the countdown: self-destruct sequence initiated. Detonation in 10 minutes. Lina made her way to the escape pod, her heart pounding. The corridors seemed to pulse with light as the entity fought back, trying to stop her. Doors slammed shut in her path, forcing her to reroute through the maintenance shafts. The whispers became a deafening roar, drowning out her thoughts. Finally, she reached the pod. She climbed inside, sealing the hatch behind her. As the countdown reached 0, she launched into the void, the Erebus shrinking behind her. The explosion was blinding, a brilliant flash that consumed the ship and everything aboard it. As Lina drifted in the escape pod, she closed her eyes. The whispers were gone, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly alone. But in the distance, among the stars, a faint glow began to form. The entity wasn't finished.